Very good morning. As we all know, we have seen about the different programming languages C, C++, Java, JWT, so likely. So we have n number of the programming languages that has been developed at various times for the various purposes. Likely, we have a recently booming, very important language that widely used in every industries. So we are going to see about that programming language, that is the Python. So everyone would have heard about this word, the Python programming, Python scripting or anything. So with this recent booming of this name Python, everyone will come to a conclusion and will have that thought process that it's a new, very recently identified or created programming languages. So that is an insight about this programming languages. When we go through these slides, we'll get to know whether it is a recently identified programming language or very old one. Fine. Let's dive into the introduction to the Python programming. And Krishna, and that's me. Fine. As a part of introduction, we'll have some features and why we need to go for this Python programming languages, and these things we are got to see about. First one, Python is a general purpose interpreted language. So what do you mean by general purpose interpreted language? General purpose, as I told you previously, at a different period of time, different programming languages will be developed. Some of the programming languages will be developed for a specific purpose and they are well suited for that purpose alone. That kind of programming languages we call as a specific purposed programming languages. Whereas some programming languages may be developed for general purpose, it is applicable for different applications or different genres can be used. Such kind of the languages we call as general purpose language. One such kind, the Python, we also call as a general purpose interpreted language. So this is very important because normally for every programming languages we use compilers, whereas in Python we use interpreters. Here we need to know the difference between the interpreter and the compiler. What's the difference between the interpreted language and a compiled language? So let me go with the first one, the compiled language. As we are very well aware about many compiler or compiled languages. So what is the meaning? We have a set of code. What the compiler will do is it compiles, identifies the error, checks for the syntax completely, the whole block of code, whatever the length, never mind, the whole block of code, the complete program will be checked for errors, and the errors or some warnings or some syntactical errors or logical problems, that will be pointed out at the end. On the whole, the program will be compiled together, and that is what we call as compiled language. Even before execution, the coding will be compiled and that will be made ready for execution, and it will be converted into an intermediate language. The object file will also be created, and that is what we call as a compiled language, and that will be done by the compiler. So coming to the interpreter or interpreted language. So what is interpreter? The main difference between the interpreter and a compiler is interpreter checks line by line. Only if that error in line 1 cleared, it passes to the line 2 and line 3 and so on. And that is the main difference between the interpreter and the compiler. And the language which follows is what we call as interpreted language, and the language which follows the compiler is called compiled language. Okay. So these are the two main differences between the interpreted language and compiled language. So the Python falls under the interpreted language. Fine. Second one, the multi-paradigm programming. So what is multi-paradigm programming? The programming style, as far as the programming paradigm is concerned, we have different kinds. That is what I have already told you. some programming languages will be developed for a specific purpose. So that programming languages may be aptly suitable only for that purpose alone, whereas it supports the different style of programming. Say like if you want a database to be connected, possibly you can do it. If you want any create any web application, possibly we can do with this. So if you want to do coding using the object-oriented concepts, so that can also be commemorated here with this programming language. For this reason, we call this Python is a multi-paradigm programming. And next, it supports dynamic data type. So dynamic data type. So what do you mean by dynamic data type? Yeah, as we all know about the data type. I mean, for your simple understanding, what I can tell you is, in any normal programming language, if you declare a variable, so what will you do? We'll define the data type. Say for example, I want to declare a variable a. So what will I do? Int a. So means the data type of that variable will be defined first. Then I will assign a value for that variable, a equal to 10. So 10 is a value and a is a variable of type integer. So that has to be declared previously. Okay, so this is the normal programming language it follows. Here in Python, it's completely different. That declaration is not necessary. Directly, I can assign values to a variable, a equal to 10, that's all. Whenever I started programming, so that assignment is more than enough, no declaration. So why we say this is a dynamic data type? Because I am not defining the data type of that variable, a equal to 10. So what is the value I am assigning to that variable a? Depending upon that value, the data type will be dynamically assigned. If I assign 10.2, if the value is 10.2 for a, then the data type of a will be float. If I assign a string a equal to, in single quotes, hello, so hello will be assigned to that variable and data type of that variable will be string. For this reason, we call this as a dynamic data type. So that data type declaration is not necessary. Dynamically, depending upon the value, it keeps changing. So that is the main biggest advantage in Python. Yeah, it is easy to learn, read and maintain, because one main reason what I can tell you is this Python, it is not overly strict. It never follows a strict rules. The syntax are very simple. For this reason, it makes any beginners, it is not essentially that he should have learned some other programming language. That is not mandatory at all. Even a beginner, he is very scratch, right from the scratch, he doesn't know anything about the programming. That kind of person can also understand this language. So that is for that reason we call it easy to learn, read and maintain. Very interactive. Yes, of course, because of the Python shell, we call it is very interactive. Why? Because say I am assigning a value a equal to 10. So the value is assigned for the variable a. So I want to print the value of a. So in any programming language, we'll have the print statement. Yes, but here when you're working with the Python shell, it is not necessary that you should type print. Simply, if you type a, in the very next line, you will get the value of a, the value stored in that variable a. It is very responsive and very interactive. For this is what we call as auto echoing or auto printing. Automatically, it prints the value of any variable that has been typed in the Python shell. Okay. So for that reason, we call this as very interactive, nothing else. Then automatic memory management, of course, in many programming languages, the memory management, that's a big deal, that's a big task. Even the programmer takes their own risk on assigning the memory and managing the memory overflow errors and exceptional handlings. We have to write for exceptions, whereas here in Python, it automatically manages the memory. That's not a big deal for the programmer. So for the programmer's convenience, this programming language Python is very flexible. Alright, that's all about the introduction. Next we'll see the history of Python. Okay, so here comes the clue which I want to conclude. because very recently most of the people will think this Python programming has been developed very recently, but actually that's not. In fact, this Python programming is a very old way of programming in late 1980s, exactly in the year between 1985 and 1990. It was developed by Guido van Rossum. So he is the father of this Python programming. And now this guy is working in Dropbox. The Guido van Rossum is working in Dropbox. Fine. So why this man, this Guido van Rossum, has named this programming language as Python? Everyone will have a trickling answer. Whenever you say Python, then normally the people have an idea because of the longest reptile in the world, that is called the python, the snake python. We are all well aware about that python. We may have a number of imaginary answers. Say the python makes because it is not overly strict and it is syntax free, it is very easy. Even a big line of codes can be minimized to some small lines of codes. For this reason we have named it as Python. So we can have a number of imaginary answers, but that may not be right most of the time. So let's see why Guido van Rossum has named this as a Python. Fine. So here is the answer why Rossum has named it as a Python. So he is very fond of Monty Python's Flying Circus. What is this Monty Python and what is this Flying Circus? Flying Circus, it's a television show. It was aired in BBC in 1969. So he is very fond of that series, the Flying Circus, and this series was developed by the Monty Python. So Monty Python is a group of people who assembled together, made a group, and they have started doing a surreal comedy shows. So this Guido van Rossum is a very big fan of the Monty Python. That made him to name the programming language as Python. So here you have the photograph of that Monty Python group, the group of people. These are the 5 group of people who made the surreal comedies in late 60s and 70s. This made the Guido van Rossum to name the programming language as Python. Fine. Modes of programming. So what are the modes of what are the ways that we can work with Python? The first one is interactive mode. Yeah, that is already I was telling you when I was explaining the Python is very interactive. You can work with a shell. So what is that shell? We'll see in the forthcoming videos. I will specifically made a video how to work with the Python with different modes. An interactive mode, it is when you work with the Python shell, it very responsive. Okay, and that is one mode. And second one is it's a script mode. Script mode, here you need to know the difference between the interactive mode and script mode. Interactive mode is very responsive. Yeah, say for example you are assigning a value a is equal to 10, you are printing the same and getting a value for b equal to 20, a plus b, and automatically it gives you a result 30. So very responsive and very quickly it gives you the output for the assignments or for the calculations that we are intended to do. But in interactive mode you cannot save anything. You cannot save any code. That is point number 1. And point number 2, in interactive mode it is very well established supporting for limited lines of code, maybe 3 or 4 lines of code, not more than that. Yeah, if you want a program to be developed in a lengthy manner, you cannot complete your logics within 4 to 5 lines of code. Maybe it goes to 50 to 100. It depends upon the application which we develop. So for that reason, for a codes of lengthy size, for a long size programming, it is not supportive interactive mode. I mean, for these 2 reasons we go for script mode. In script mode you can write your lengthy program and you can save your code with .py extension. That is all. That makes a much difference between the interactive mode of programming and script mode of programming. Okay, so what is that script mode? How it can be done? Normally, you know what, you can use any editors, say like Sublime Text, Wrangler, or Notepad++, or anything. You can have any editors. That is a normal way of using. But the professional way of using an editor is the inbuilt editor that has been provided in Python. When you are installing Python, we'll have an IDE. So IDLE, that is an application, that is an environment provided by the Python itself. The IDLE stands for Integrated Development and Learning Environment. That is what the IDLE stands for. So IDLE is a perfect way of writing programs and saving it together. That's all. So these are the two modes of programming. Next we'll see the identifiers. So what do you mean by identifiers? Just you want to identify whether it is a variable or a function or class or module or object. So that is what we call as an identifiers, and that you know, in every programming languages we'll have these identifiers, and it is very case sensitive here. In Python it's very case sensitive. The naming conventions, how to name a variable and how to name a class. So we have some conventional methods that has to be followed in every programming languages. That is the ownership of every programming languages that has to be supported. As far as the class name is concerned, it should start with uppercase. Yeah, that has to be followed. And whereas for other identifiers it is not necessary, it can be lowercase. And if you start any identifiers with underscore, single underscore, and that is identified or indicated as a private identifier. So these are the simple conventions that has to be followed for naming a variable or anything, a class name or any identifier. And keywords, these are all some list of keywords that every programming languages have, likely the Python do. The lines and indentation. Yeah, you know, it's very important. Indentation is very important in Python, because in any programming language, when you define, if you start any function, or if you start a loop, or if you define a condition, if else condition or anything, so once you have defined a function or a loop or a condition, you will start with the curly braces, and that curly brace has to be closed. Means that defines the block of code have the control, and that block of code will be controlled by the loop, or that block of code will be controlled by the condition, or that block of code will be controlled by the main function. So that is the meaning. So that is the meaning of referring or using the curly braces. Here in Python, the curly braces not used. Instead, we use indentation. So whenever you define a class or a function or anything, that function should end with colon. Even if you define a for loop, that for loop should end with a colon. Condition, if condition, else or elif, anything, that should end with colon. That colon will gives you the proper indentation. Only with that indentation, your interpreter will get to know the block of code will be controlled by that function or the loop. So that is very important. That has to be followed very strictly. That is all. That's all about the lines and indentations. Then we need to know about the programming, the nuances, the preliminaries or anything for programming. And quotation, this Python accepts both single and double quotations, no problem. Yeah. And comments. So normally when you want to comment a line, double slash we use commenting a single line, and for multiple lines slash and an asterisk. Here we use hash. And the multiple statements, if you want to type multiple statements on single line, so that is possible here in the Python programming, and what we have to use is a semicolon should be used. So that is how you can use the multiple statements. That's all about the nuances of this programming. Fine. So here we have seen the necessary features and introduction and the programming structures of the Python programming. So maybe in the next video we'll see about the data types and variables and declarations and so on. Fine. Thank you.